Hello, BookTube. As you can see, I am still up in the very old house in Vermont. For those of you who are coming late to the melodrama, the Bean and I, my little dog and I, came up to the house of Mark Richardson, booktuber Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads. I don't even remember when. It was a long time ago we came up here, and we had originally planned to go back to Boston on Saturday. And then on Saturday, Boston was hit with its greatest single snowstorm event ever in its history and was buried in snow and howling winds and freezing rain and down power lines and whatnot. And that's not only an uninviting place to go back to, it's also a dangerous thing to ask a host to do, to drive you into that kind of a mess. So we postponed things. And so the Bean and I are still here. We are once again eyeing a Saturday return date, but once again, that there are question marks around that because there's a huge storm system descending on the United States in a diagonal slash across the eastern half of the country for Wednesday and Thursday. And the prediction models are not secure on what it will be at its far eastern extreme. The middle area of it looks big. I think the upper Midwest, the parts of the Great Lakes region are going to get buried in snow, just like Boston did last week. But what it will do in Vermont and Boston, I don't know. Right now, if I had to guess, I would say that things will be bright and cold and relatively cleared up by Saturday morning, which is the next available window to take me and the Bean back. Fortunately, there's not a whole lot of urgency on our part. I can't speak for our hosts. They might want to get rid of us, but there's not a whole lot of urgency. Everything, as I've mentioned on this channel before, I'm kind of a self-contained unit. If I have my laptop and I have my little baby, then it doesn't matter to me where I am, right? I can read and write all day long anyway, no matter where I am. I'm doing that on a great little couch in a beautiful living room now with plenty of winter light pouring through the windows. I would be doing it on my fainting couch back at Hyde Cottage with plenty of light falling through the windows if I were there. So we shall see. I will keep you updated on the thrilling story as it develops. This storm is the Weather Channel is calling it Landon. And the projections are getting bigger all the time. Some of you are going to be facing this later on this week. But because I'm up here in the old house in Vermont, I have a bump in my library tour. On 2022, I'm doing a library tour, a visual record of all the books that I own. But since I'm up here, I thought I would expand that to some books that I have owned in the past, and maybe a lot of books that I have owned in the past don't own now, but wish I did, so that I have sort of a visual record of that too. I have, fortunately, thousands of scanned book covers of stuff that I have read in the past. I've read a lot in the past. So we're going to go through a few more of those today, starting with a work of field ecology, field primatology. This is by Shirley Strum, and it is called Almost Human, A Journey into the World of Baboons. That is the book right there. Though there is the author, she has her clipboard, and she is surrounded by baboons. I remember this being extremely lively, full of anecdotes, but also full of rock-solid natural history about baboons. The only problem that I have with the book is the title. Baboons are not almost human at all. No way can you say that. There are beings on Earth who are almost human, but baboons aren't them. Unless you're going to draw the distinction line way, way back in our common cladistic history, and I don't think that's very accurate. But baboons certainly have human-like traits. I have met them many, many times, and they're unpleasant people. Generally speaking, they're unpleasant people, and they tend to be a lot bigger, and the males tend to be a lot bigger and a lot more powerful than most people think. In fact, I have a tedious story from when I was traveling. For those of you who are new to this channel, long before I was a sexy influencer and a sedentary book reviewer, I traveled a lot. I did a lot of traveling. And I have a baboon story that is pretty horrific. It's not a fun story. And the ending of that story is one of the times in my life when I have felt the most ashamed of myself. So baboons hold a place in my rhetorical repertoire. But if you're interested in them, this is years and years old, decades old. So I imagine baboon field research since then has improved. But you might want to look for Almost Human. I know that if I were to see it again, I would grab it. Same thing with this next one. This was a big, fat, mass-market paperback. A lot of you of a certain vintage will know this author, although I believe this author is out of print now. This is The Eagle and the Raven by Pauline Gedge. A big, fat historical novel. I had this is the cover that I scanned. Big, fat, mass-market paperback of a historical novel that is in large part, about Boudica, the woman who led a revolt against the Roman forces in Britain, and who, back in my Edwardian days, we referred to as Boadicea. I guess she's not referred to that way anymore. I can't wrap my head around saying Boudica, but I guess I'll have to. And this is, Pauline Gedge also wrote a couple of really good historical novels set in ancient Egypt. I wish I could say that this was as good as it was popular. This book was enormously popular, but it's turgid. It goes on and on. It doesn't earn its length. It's like 1,000 pages long, and it doesn't earn that. And I love 1,000-page novels as much as anybody, but they have to earn it. I don't give it to them. Boudica has a fascinating story, and it's buried under excess verbiage in this book. So I might, if I saw it for 50 cents, I might grab it, but I can't wholeheartedly recommend it, nor can I wholeheartedly recommend this next one, which I also got in a paperback. I'm never going to see this again. I don't even think this rises to the level of a cult classic. This is by Austin Tappan Wright, and it's Islandia. It's a weird, surrealistic paradise novel, a kind of hidden paradise novel. That it's long and it's extremely rhetorically involved. And I think it might be a lot more enjoyable as a reading experience if the author had ever actually got to finish it. But he didn't. He wrote and imagined and fleshed out little bits and pieces of this world for a long time, for most of his adult life. But he didn't live long enough to write the book. So these are later editorial gleanings. It probably doesn't have the shape or the size that he wanted to give it. But it is fascinating. It had a widespread sort of cult readership in, I believe, the 70s. So who knows? So there's a doctoral dissertation out there to be written on the effect that this thing, the underground, the sort of seismic effect that this thing had on a whole bunch of other recognized mainstream science fiction and fantasy novels. Be interested to know what that is. I've never pursued it in the letters or the biographies of some authors to find out, were they influenced by this book. It's influential in a way. Certainly when you read it, you very much feel like you're reading something that no one's read, even though lots of people have. It has that cult feeling to it. This next one is on this Library of the Lost, mainly because I don't have this paperback. I have copies of this book. I have an e-copy of it and I think a trade paperback. But this is an old mass market paperback with a Darrell K. Sweet cover of The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. Predating Lord of the Rings, predating The Once and Future King, and one of the only fantasy novels I would say belongs in their caliber of literature. This is one of the greatest fantasy novels ever written. Lord Dunsany, several of you have asked me, is the rest of his stuff good? I can't vouch for his stage plays. I don't think they preserve very well. But his fantasy short stories and his fantasy novels are very, very good. All of them are. They're all worth your time. They were all written in an Irish castle with a quill pen in a bottle of ink. But none of them even come close, I think, to the power of this. None of the novels do. A couple of the short stories are brilliant. He was a brilliant short story writer, and a couple of those are wonderful. But The King of Elfland's Daughter stands on its own. And yet, in the 21st century, when you ask people, list off the seminal great works of classic fantasy, of so-called classic fantasy, very few people even remember that this book exists. They don't remember Silverlock. They don't remember this. They start straight with Narnia and Tolkien. And that's a shame. So I hardly ever see copies of Dunsany anymore, and I haven't seen this particular mass market paperback. I want this mass market paperback, but I haven't seen this particular one in well over a decade. I would grab it if I saw it, but if you see it, it's great. So give it a try. You'll love it, I think. Okay, this next one. We'll also deal with cover art, but this is a very good science fiction novel. I'm not sure that I'd put it in a top 50, but it's very, very good from, I think, a brilliant, but despite the howls of his fans, a resolutely second-rate science fiction author. There can be brilliant second-rate authors. This is Thomas Dish, who wrote a number of stories, a number of novels. I don't think any of them really gel, to the extent, I think he has a couple of fans left alive, and I think they think he's more brilliant than he is. This is his book On Wings of Song, which I think is his most famous novel. I think it's his most effective novel. And it's a story of a dystopian future, although it's in our past now, where the American Midwest, the picturesque American Midwest, has become a thought police dystopia. But some people scattered amongst the sheeple can fly in a complicated way. It's not just that they flap their arms and fly, but there's flight involved, and flight is twisted in with the concept of freedom, and it has very effective passages in it. And the reason why I'm talking about the cover is because the cover I scanned here is from a later reprint. There is our main character. He is dressed in 1980s or 90s style futuristic garb, and he is flying over a city. And I gladly bought this copy, because when I found it at a used bookstore, I did not have a copy of the book, but it wasn't the first copy that I read. Somewhere in this Library of the Lost, I also don't have a copy of that either, but this had a previous paperback printing, where this cover is an homage to that previous paperback printing. A very rare thing in science fiction for someone to just ape a previous cover to a book. Think about Stranger in a Strange Land, for instance. The black covered mass market paperback that you old fogies will have encountered in your bookstore, with the two heads melding together and the word grok in between them, is very different cover artwork from the blue cover of the later issue of Stranger in a Strange Land. Whereas here, this is just an update. The original paperback cover showed a young man also flying up straight at the viewer of the painting, but he's in a button-down shirt and blue jeans and sneakers, and he is flying over big blank green cornfields of Iowa. So this is just an update of that cover, and I grabbed this thinking, well, you're never going to see that original cover again, and then I did, but I don't think I have either one. I don't think I have either cover now. And I don't mean to poo-poo Thomas Dish. He's very good. He will reward, On Wings of Song will reward a read. I guess I'm pushing back against the over-veneration that I've sometimes heard from people at conventions about him. Okay, this next one is... it was a trade paperback from One World Classics. I don't know if One World Classics is still in business, and I don't know if this book is in print by anybody else. This is Boy by James Hanley. This version had an introduction by Anthony Burgess. I don't quite know what to say about this book. Or when we talk about, literary fiction, when we talk about fiction, the made-up stories, we sometimes haul out the word brutal. We say that a book is brutal. And usually what that means is that somebody gets shot in the arm in the fifth act. When you're talking brutal in fiction, very little compares to this book. Very little does. This is about waste paper people. This is about people who never even have a chance to become anything before the offhand, uncaring cruelty of the world just disposes of them. And that's it. And that's all. And Hanley had the idea, I think very subversive idea, that to try to tell that story. In other words, the story of a boy who never even gets to have a story. He never even gets to be that. He's nothing. He's just the offal that you wash off the deck. It's very beautifully written, but oh my, talk about a depressing reading experience. You got to go in. It's not a long book, but you have to go into this ready for the bleakest, most brutal novel you will read this year. I was, hats off to One World Classics for bringing this out. I was happy to get it. And yet, where did my copy go? I've no idea. I seriously doubt that anyone will reprint this. But this is worth your time to read, provided you're okay with inviting Debbie Downer to the table. Because, like I said, we think maybe a Richard Price novel is bleak. It's nothing compared to this book, nothing at all. Okay, then we have a big detailed work of history. that I really wish I still had. I really wish I still had all of these. This is by Eric McGeer, and it's called Sowing the Dragon's Teeth. And it's about Byzantine warfare. A very readable but very detailed, down deep in the sources study of how Byzantine armies in the 10th century made war, how they were financed, how they were supplied, how they were deployed, how they were generaled and managed. Just terrific. You won't even call it, you can't even call it really just military history, because there's a lot more to it than that. I don't remember if this came out from an academic press or not, and I certainly don't remember why I got rid of it. Probably I know the reason. Probably it's that I was in contact with someone who said, I'm really starting to become fascinated with Byzantine Rome. Are there any really good books that I must have? And probably I had it sitting right there and said, oh my, let me get you started. When really, simply giving people the title and the author is enough. In a circumstance like that, that's enough. I have never successfully taught myself that that's enough. For me, always that first initial step includes sending them the book. And I ought to learn to control that impulse because I wish I still had this. Okay. Well, I don't have a copy of this next one either, but I don't worry about it because it was printed so many times with so many different covers in so many different presses that I will certainly come across a copy at the Brattle Bookshop once they dig out from that monster snowstorm. This is by Christopher Morley. This is probably his best-known book. This is The Haunted Bookshop. And it has its own plot about modernity trying to come to a wonderfully inefficient bookstore in America. It has its own plot, and that plot has some pretty good, memorable characters. But the main thing about this book that accounts for its popularity is that it gives you the bookshop of your dreams, which bookish people dream about, but they're not often lucky enough to get it. Right? A bookshop where to coin a phrase, everybody knows your name, where you are well known, where your tastes are well known, where the staff are characters but they aren't a-holes, where there's always something new, where you can contour your reading life to that shop and just be loyal to that shop, and it won't let you down, and it's not impersonal, and it's not going anywhere. Bookish people dream about bookshops like that, but almost nobody has a chance to have a bookshop like that. Usually, bookish people have to make do with a string of second-rate local charities, or the occasional library sale, or the local branch of a big retail store that has poor selection and, needless to say, savagely rude staff. Usually that's what bookish people have to do. I feel sorry about that. That wasn't true 50 years ago. The little shops like this sprung up like toadstools in every city 50 years ago. But rents have spiraled out of control. Reading has changed. The online has changed. So that isn't true anymore. I speak as one of the lucky ones. I have one of these shops of my own, not just the Haunted Bookshop in Iowa City. For a long time in Iowa City, there was a used bookstore that named itself after this book and called itself the Haunted Bookshop. I don't know, and I almost don't want to know, if the Haunted Bookshop in Iowa City is still in business. I spent so much time there. So much time. They were an ordinary used bookstore in the sense that the stock almost never changed. So I could go in there on a Monday and look at something, wonder if I really wanted it, and go back 2 other Mondays later and it would still be there. And I knew it would still be there. Very different from the store that I actually am lucky enough, the Haunted Bookshop that I actually am lucky enough to have, which is the Brattle Bookshop in Boston, where not only is the turnover so great that you absolutely should not sleep on anything, you should not wait on any purchase that you want to make, but also I've been going there so long that I am part of, I would take it upon myself to say I am part of the extended Brattle family. They all know me, I know them. So I'm lucky enough to look at this book from a different perspective than most people who read it. But if you are a bookish person who has dreamed about that kind of bookshop, this is the book that will be the book of your dreams. You will read it with a smile on your face from beginning to end. So I'm not the first person nor the millionth to recommend the Haunted Bookshop, but I don't think Christopher Morley is as read now as he used to be. So maybe it needs a recommendation. I'm sure that you can. I always get in trouble when I say this, but in this case, I am sure that you can go on eBay or Amazon Marketplace and find a copy of this book for $2. I am 100% sure of that. There's no way that it could be universally hypervalued. There were way too many printings of it. And then the last one for today is by Ivan Morris, and this is The World of the Shining Prince. This is about the Heian court in Japan, the court that gave us the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon and the Tale of Genji. And this is about that world and deals, the best parts of it for me, the most entertaining parts are the parts that deal with the literature of the period, including Genji. There's a lot about Genji in this book. And don't have a copy, but this used to be far more popular than Genji itself. This book came out, I think, when there was only one English language translation, the Arthur Waley translation. I think this book predates the Seidensticker translation, or maybe they came out at the same time. But either way, there weren't many opportunities for English readers to know Genji, to know the book, or to know its Shining Prince, its Ophis Shining Prince. And this was an invaluable companion. I wish that it were a little bit more readily available than it is now. I'm not sure that it's even still in print, but it used to be my go-to thing when people would come to me and say, "Hey, when I ask you about gigantic novels that you really love, you always mention the Tale of Genji." And so I finally went to the library and checked it out, and it's incredibly intimidating. Is there anything you could give me, any companion volume that you could give me? I would always recommend this thing. Often I would hand it to someone. As just, it's not a long novel, so just this is not a long book, so just read it. By the time you're done, you'll be fairly well familiar with Genji's background, with the social and cultural background that informed the epic. I guess you could get that now. Probably you wouldn't need this book. Probably you could get that from the Wikipedia entry for the Tale of Genji and all the links, the hyperlinks that take you in all directions from that entry. And also, probably for all I know, there are websites entirely devoted to Genjiana, in English, I mean, entirely devoted to explaining the book. So you probably don't need this book anymore, but this book is smart and very gracefully written. So you would like it, and you would like to add it to the shelf with Genji, all your translations of Genji. I would certainly like to do that, but I don't have a copy, and I haven't found a copy up here in Vermont. But anyway, that is the library tour of the Lost for today. We have days more to go here. I mean, this is a busy house full of busy people, and I don't drive, so somebody has to drive me and Frida back to Boston, and that's no small thing. That's a couple of hours one way. Then you drop us all off, and then it's a couple of hours back. So you're gone for either the whole of the morning or the whole of the afternoon. In a busy house with many moving parts, that's not a given. So the next time there's a window open, we will be ferried back to Boston, weather permitting. But in the meantime, I've got plenty more books to show you. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.